For this second section, we're going to be moving to what we call the midpoint in the segment addition postulate. Now, the name kind of says it all. Midpoint, I'm going to be finding something about a point in the middle. Segment addition postulate. We're going to be using the word postulate in geometry as a instead of rule. Now, segment addition, I'm going to be adding segments. So that's basically what we're going to be covering today. The first part, the one I'm going to be looking at is the midpoint. But before I even look at the midpoint, let me go over what you guys know as average. Remember, in average, you guys add the numbers and divide it by how many numbers you have. Let's say I was to give you two numbers, 6 and 8. And I ask you, give me the average of those two numbers. So you're like, oh, that's easy. I go 6 plus 8. In my result, I divide it by 2, right? I added the numbers and divided by 2. 6 plus 8 is 14 divided by 2 is 7. So the average of those two numbers is 7. But isn't 7 a number right in between 6 and 8? When we find an average, we're finding what's the point, what's the value in the middle. Let's see, what if I gave you two bigger numbers, 10 and 20? And I ask you, give me the average of those two values. Wouldn't you just add the two numbers? 10 plus 20 divided by 2 because there's two numbers. I know 10 plus 20 is 30. 30 divided by 2, that's 15. But isn't 15 the number right in between 10 and 20? So average gives us the value right in between. So when we're thinking of midpoint, the point in the middle, shouldn't we think about averages? So I know a point because it says I'm asking a point. In this case, I'm asking for the midpoint. I know a point has an x and a y coordinate. It has two values. So let me worry about the x value first. I'm given two endpoints. What I mean with that is we have a segment and I'm giving you to the two endpoints. I want to find the midpoint. All right, I know each endpoint, I know each of my values has an x value. I'm just focused on my x value right now. I want to know what's in between 6 and negative 3. Why don't I just get the average of those two numbers? I'm just going to do for my x value, I'm going to add my numbers, 6 plus a negative 3. In my result, I'm going to divide it by 2. 6 plus a negative 3 is 3. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. That gives me my x value. Now let's worry about the y value. I'm going to look at the y values of my endpoints. Let me add those two values, negative 10 plus 3. And whatever I get, I'll divide it by 2. You know, negative 10 plus 3 is negative 7. Negative 7 divided by 2, isn't that negative 3.5? So those are the coordinates of my midpoint. 1.5, negative 3.5. Now, my homework, when you guys type it in, on the homework practice, I had you guys type in coordinates. Remember, I said after the comma, I always put in a space. So make sure when you type in your homework, let me emphasize, there's a space after the comma. You're going to use the parentheses and you're going to use a space after the comma. So make sure you don't forget that. Now let's take a look at my other example here. I'm going to worry about the x value. So I'm just looking at my x values here. I'm going to go 4 plus a negative 6. I'm going to add my numbers. In my result, I'll divide it by 2. That's going to give me my x value. 4 plus a negative 6, that's a negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2, that's negative 1. Now for my y value, I'm going to look at these values. That's negative 10 plus a negative 8. Whatever I get, I'll divide it by 2. Negative 10 plus a negative 8, isn't that negative 18? Negative 18 divided by 2, isn't that negative 9? So don't be surprised if you have decimals or integers, like whole numbers. Don't forget the space after the comma. Remember, this is if I give you the two endpoints and I'm asking for the midpoint. Now, if I give you guys a graph, technically I'm giving you the endpoint. You can read from the graph, you can read the coordinates of the point. Look at one point. The coordinates of that point are 4, 4, right? The x value is 4, the y value is 4. Look at my other point. My coordinates of that point are -5, 2. I can read the coordinates of that -5, 2. Now that I have the values, I'm asking here for the midpoint. Why don't I find the values of the midpoint? First of all, let me focus on the x. I'm going to add the two values, -5 plus 4. And whatever I get, I'll divide it by 2. That gives me my x value. -5 plus 4 is not -1. -1 divided by 2 is in that -0.5. Don't type in just a 0.5. Type in 0.5. Okay, that's how I got the x value. Now, what about the y value? I'm just focused on the y values of my endpoints. 2 plus 4 divided by 2. Now, you might be asking, is it 2 plus 4 or 4 plus 2? Does it matter which one I add first? No. Right, 2 plus 4 divided by 2. Isn't that 3? The coordinates of my point. So, matter of fact, if I was to graph it, like that's it, like on your homework, just type that in. If you were to graph the point -0.53, that gives you this point. And as you notice, it is right in the middle. Nice. Take a look at my other example. My coordinates, I have the coordinates -5, 0. Right, that's this point. I just put the values on top so for me to easily see it. The other point I have 4, -2. All right, so let's find the midpoint. Let's worry about the x value first. Let me look at the x values. -5 plus 4 divided by 2. It's going to give me the x value. -5 plus 4 divided by 2, that is -0.5. Looks like the previous one by coincidence. Let's take a look at the y value now. I'm going to add the y values. 0 plus a -2, and my result divided by 2. That gives me -1. When you type in your work, don't forget to type in the space after the comma. So that's if I give you the two endpoints and I'm asking for the midpoint. Now, what if I switch it a little? Find the other endpoint of the line segment with the given endpoint and the midpoint. All right, so what it's saying here is there's a two endpoints and there's a midpoint. I'm giving you one endpoint and I'm giving you one midpoint. I'm asking, what's the other endpoint? So I switched it a little. So I'm looking for the other endpoint. Let me write it down right here. Endpoint. The coordinates of my point, I'm going to call them right now x and y. I don't know what they are. I don't know what the values of x and y are. All I know is if I add the two x values of my endpoints. So in this case, let me go 7 plus x divided by 2. If I add the two x values of my endpoints divided by 2 will give me the x value of my midpoint. Nice. 7 plus x divided by 2 equals -8. I have to solve for an x and a y. So I'm going to follow that step to solve for x. Now, what about y? I know for the y value, because remember I'm solving for x and y. For the y value, I'm going to add the two y values of my endpoints. -3 plus y divided by 2. And in this case, is equal to -10. It is equal to the y value of the midpoint. All right, so I can solve for x and y now. So for my first part, let me get rid of fractions. I don't want to deal with fractions. Let me multiply each side by 2. That way I get rid of fractions. So I have that 7 plus x is equal to -16. Let me get the x by itself. So that +7, I'm going to move it to the other side. Every time you move something from one side to the other, switch the sign. So my +7, I'm going to move it to the other side. It's -7. So I get that x is equal to negative 23. What about the y? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of fractions. I have that negative 3 plus y is equal to negative 20. My negative 3, let me move it over as a positive. Whenever you move something from one side to the other, switch the sign. I get that y is equal to negative 17. So the coordinates of the endpoint, what I'm looking for is negative 23, negative 17. Take a look at my other example. The endpoint that I'm looking for, once again, I don't know what it is. The x value, I'm going to call it x, and the y value, I'm going to call it y. All I know is if I add the x values of my endpoints and divide it by 2, it's going to give me the x value of my midpoint. If I add the y values of my endpoints divided by 2, it's going to give me the y value of my midpoint. I'm going to multiply each side by 2 to get rid of fractions. So I have that negative 6 plus x is equal to 14. My negative 6, let me move it over as a plus 6. So I have that x is equal to 20. Here, let me multiply both sides to get rid of fractions. So I got that 10 plus y is equal to negative 2. My 10, let me move it over. Forget to switch the sign. Y equals negative 12. So the endpoint that I'm looking for is 20, negative 12. Don't forget the space after the comma. Now let's talk about the segment addition postulate. Now here, looking at the blue, it tells me that from S to U, the distance from S to U is 12. But part of it from S to T is 9. So I know from S to U all the way is 12. Part of it is 9. For me to find out what's TU, I'm going to call it 3 because I subtracted my two values. All right, 9 plus 3 equals 12. Now I have information on my line, on my initial segment from SV. So now the question here it is find TV. So I want to know what's the distance between T and V. From T to V. Isn't that this whole thing right here? I'm going to add those two numbers. So I'm just going to say this is 6. Whenever you type in, just type in 6. Now, for my other example, I'm going to be using, let's take a look at the first blue, the segment DF, and the segment DG. I know the whole segment DG is 17. I know part of it, the segment DF is 11. Let me subtract those. 17 minus 11 is 6. I'm going to say, what is 6? Whatever I get here. I subtracted those, and that's how I got FG. So that's 6. Now, let me take a look at my last segment here. Segment EG. The whole from E to G is 16. I know from F to G is 6. Then we can agree that EF is 10. Because remember, the whole thing is 16. I can figure out what DE is. Matter of fact, is 1. I use that, I get that from the first segment. The whole DF is 11. Part of it is 10. I can agree this is 1. I don't need that though, because my question here is EF. Find EF. What's the distance between E and F? 10. Now, geometry sometimes is not that simple. Let's take a look. I have points A, B, C, and D are collinear and positioned in that order. So I have 4 points. They're collinear, so they're in the same line. There's A, B, C, and D. I have something about AC. I'm just gonna do have something about the segment AC. Have something about the segment AD. I have something about the segment BD. And BC is 66. I'll just write that easily. BC 66. We want to know how big is AC. I wish I knew what AB is so I could just add those two. All right, so what can we do? Let's say if I was to add the segment AC plus BD. So I know something about AC and I know something about BD. Doesn't that give me the whole segment AD? However, I'm using BC twice, right? Let me subtract BC once because I only want to use it once. So AC plus BD, say if I add those, that gives me the whole segment, but I'm using BC twice. So I subtracted a BC, and that gives me the whole segment AD. All right, so I see my segments here. About AC, let me write down. What do I know about AC? I know it is 5x plus 520. What do I know about BD? Because I know something about the segment BD. That is 5x plus 503. Minus BC. I know that's 66. I know something about AD. AD, I know it's 7x plus 705. All right, let me separate things through the equal sign to make it easy for me to see. Now, simple algebra. Let me combine like terms. On the left side, there's too many terms. Let me combine like terms. 5x plus 5x. That gives me 10x. Now, my numbers there, I have 523 plus 503 minus 66. That is 960. Now, on the right side, I have 7x plus 705. Good. All right, I see x's on both sides. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have x's on one side and non-x's on the other side. Let me get rid of the small x. I'm going to move it to the left side as a minus 7x. So I'm going to have letters, in this case, on the left side. The 960, let me move it to the other side. Don't forget to switch the sign. That's 960. Negative 960. Don't forget to switch the sign. So on the left side, 10x minus 7x, right? 10 minus 7, that's 3x. 705 minus 960. That is negative 255. Let's divide it by 3. Now, my question here was not solve for x. I am solving for x because I need it. My question here is find AC. I know something about the segment AC. Has an x in it, but that's why I figure out what x was. Use the value of x. So I'm looking at what's 5 times a negative 85 plus 520. That's AC. That's a segment AC. What's that? 5 times a negative 85, that's negative 425, plus 523. So I'm going to say what I'm looking for is 98. All right, let's take a look at another example. Let's take a look at the one on the right. I have points A, B, C, and D. They're collinear. Okay, and then they're in that order. So let's say that A, that's B, that's C, and that's D. Now, my information that I have, I know something about AD. So I know about this segment, AD. I know something about BC, right, from B to C. I know that AC is 114. I'm just going to write AC is 114. This whole segment. And BD, I know something about BD. All right, so I'm thinking, how can I possibly get the whole segment? Let's take a look at these two. If I was to add AC, the segment AC, plus the segment BD, because those are the last two segments, right? AC plus BD. However, look, I'm using the segment BC twice. So let me subtract BC. So I only want to use it once. So I have AC plus BD minus BC because I want to use BC only once. And this is equal to the whole segment AD. All right, from the information on the top, we know something about AC. AC is 1/14. BD, like what's the distance between BD? We know something about BD. That is plus 13x minus 146. Now I'm going to subtract the BC. I'm going to subtract BC. So keep in mind, I'm subtracting BC. So I have to subtract 8x. However, when you subtract the negative, because there's a minus 121, when you subtract the negative, isn't that plus 121? I'm subtracting a negative in this case. And this is equal to AD. I know something about AD. 8x plus 26. I'm going to treat this as an algebra question. I'm going to look at the x's. 13 minus 8. Now my numbers, 114 minus 146 plus 121. That gives me plus 89. And this is 8x plus 26. This case, let me get rid of the 5x. I always get rid of the smallest x. My 26, I'm going to move it to the left side. So 89 minus 26, that's 63. 8x minus 5x, that's 3x. Let me divide each side by 3 to get the x by itself. I get x is equal to 21. I solve for x. Now I'm going to use it. I want to know, I'm asking you guys to find BC. I know something about BC. 8 times x minus 121. 8 times 21 minus 121. And your answer should be, let's see, 8 times 21, that is 168, minus 121. Your answer should be 47. Any questions, feel free to contact me during school hours.